Good morning to all of you. Welcome to the 7th session of the consultation ensuring food and nutrition security in the context of climate change and COVID-19 pandemic. The session is titled as Needed Policy Changes for India and South Asia to Improve Nutritional Status of Children and Women. We have 7 very accomplished speakers with us, and it is chaired by Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. Before I go, introduce this chair, I wish to set the, read out the context why this particular session is organized. Needed policy changes. See, according to the United Nations, there has been a dramatic worsening of world hunger in 2020. Right from yesterday onwards, we are seeing the statistics. So I'm not going into it due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the impacts of which are yet to be fully understood. Different parts of the globe are experiencing different kind of a situation. A recent joint report by many global agencies suggests that around a tenth of the global population are undernourished last year. The trend is continuing. Hence, the efforts to honor the pledge to end hunger by 2030 becoming much more challenging. A multi-level policy framework of action is necessary to ensure optimal nutrition intake during the pandemic by all. That is very important, especially the vulnerable sections of the society. This will ensure the respective national governments, states of preparedness. Today we have very eminent speakers with us. The chair is kind enough to agree to introduce the speakers. So I will just read out their names. It is chaired by Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. She's the Chief Scientist, World Health Organization. Before that, she headed the Tuberculosis Research Center. She headed the Indian Council of Medical Research, and prior to that, the Tuberculosis Research Center here. And amongst the panel of speakers, we have Dr. Renu Swarup, Secretary, Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, New Delhi. Dr. Vinod Pal, Member, Niti Aayog, Government of India, New Delhi. Gagandeep Kang, Professor of Microbiology, Christian Medical College, Vellore, Tamil Nadu, who is again a well-known figure to all of us. Dr. Kaosar Afsana, Professor, BRAC, James B. Grant School of Public Health, BRAC University, Bangladesh. And Mr. Zitoni Uludada, Deputy Director, Food and Agriculture Organization, Rome, Italy. And Mr. Arjun D. Bhagat, Chief of Nutrition, United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, India. So with this panel, let us hear from them what exactly to be shaped up so that we can ensure food and nutrition security during this pandemic time and make a healthy world. Over to you, Dr. Soumya.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hariharan, and good morning and greetings to colleagues who are online as well as those who are in the different centers of the MSSRF. I would like to first of all thank our panelists for agreeing to join this session, which is part of the 3-day consultation that is going on food and nutrition security. Of course, we are now speaking in the context of the pandemic, which has disrupted lives and livelihoods across the world for the past 18 months. And therefore, this particular consultation is very, very relevant because food and nutrition insecurity is one of the key areas that has been affected by the COVID pandemic. As everybody is aware, the status of food insecurity report jointly produced by FAO, WHO, and other partners was released recently, which paints a very disturbing picture of the status of food and nutrition security across the world. It clearly shows that compared to 2019, hunger had worsened in 2020. There were millions of more people who were going to bed hungry, and it was also projections for the increase in the number of children who are going to be stunted and wasted in 2021 and beyond. The report also highlighted 6 key messages that we need to consider as we are actually looking ahead. And all of these relate to food systems and the linkage between agriculture, nutrition, and health, and of course climate change. Yesterday we saw the report, the UN report, which really again paints a very grim picture of the status of climate change today, which is another huge factor that's going to affect food systems in the future. So the 6 key messages very briefly from the report are that food systems can provide affordable, healthy diets and become a powerful driving force towards ending hunger when they are transformed with greater resilience to the major drivers. The second main area was about conflict-affected areas, because we know globally that there are a large number of people living in conflict-affected areas, and so food systems there get disrupted, and one has to focus on maintaining these food systems and at the same time providing humanitarian assistance to people. For example, in Mozambique, more than 1 million people are at risk of starvation today because of climate change-associated drought. The third is innovative mechanisms to reduce climate-related risks, widespread adoption of climate-smart and environmentally sound production techniques, and the conservation and rehabilitation of natural environments. The fourth is that the economic fallout from the COVID pandemic has demonstrated that food supply chains, it's very important to keep those in operation when there are big disruptions like the pandemic, but there are also other disruptions, and adequate support to the livelihoods and food security of the most vulnerable sections of society. The fifth, I think, major learning from the pandemic has been inequalities have been exacerbated, and even when you look at food systems, the large, big grocery stores and massive e-commerce companies have benefited a lot. The billionaires have become richer. There are more billionaires today than there were a year ago, and yet at the same time we know hundreds of millions of people are pushed into poverty. So we need to use technology, data, and innovation to help those who are actually at the bottom, so that they can also make use of those innovations to improve their lives. And then we need comprehensive policies that are aimed at both the food and the natural environment. So it's really critical to link these things and not have policies which are in silos, because you need behavioral changes along the entire food supply chain as well as among consumers. So you have to shift dietary patterns for the benefit of both human health and the environment. You need good governance mechanisms and institutions, and the investments and legislations have to be maximized to combine their effects on food systems transformation. So it's all about systems approaches that contribute to win-win solutions. Now again, today we are in India, in Chennai, but we are, of course, the consultation is broader. It's talking not only about India, but also about South Asia as well as other parts of the world which face similar challenges. In India, of course, we recently have the NFHS 5 data that's come out, which again, this is pre-pandemic, so this was done in 2019-20. The first phase of the data already showed that in a number of states, malnutrition had got worse. So compared to NFHS 4, where there had been improvement, NFHS 5 showed a deterioration in child malnutrition and anemia and many other indicators. We are still waiting for the full results of the NFHS 5, but even what we've seen from 17 states and 5 union territories shows that children born between 2014 and 19 are not as well nourished as the ones born in the 5 years before. So again, we need to really look at the reasons and the drivers for child undernutrition and maternal anemia. At the same time, the rates of obesity are increasing dramatically in many states in India. So again, it's the dual undernutrition, the burden of obesity on the one hand, with continued undernutrition, wasting and stunting on the other hand, which India needs to tackle, and other countries in South Asia, Latin America, as well as Africa also are facing. So today's panelists, we'll request them to address issues which will help us to think about the policy changes that are needed to improve the nutrition status. And as I mentioned, the policy changes has to be a systems approach. It will not work if we make a policy change in one sector that is discordant with the policies which are in another sector. So I will hand over to Dr. First we need Dr. Renu, right? So I would like to invite Dr. Renu Swarup first, who is the Secretary, Department of Biotechnology in the Ministry of Science and Technology. She has been in the Department of Biotechnology for a long time and has really steered the department during both the pre-pandemic and the pandemic times, and was also leading the BRAC program that of course was set up by Dr. M.K. Bhan when he was Secretary Biotechnology, and this is a program which really invests in entrepreneurs and innovations across India, and we would like to hear from her what the Department of Biotechnology has been doing really to support innovation entrepreneurship in the area of agriculture, food and nutrition. Over to you, Dr. Renu, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soumya, and thank you, Dr. Hariharan, and thank you all the organizers for inviting me for this very important conference and consultation. Do I have the permission to share my slides with you? Can I share my slides from here?
Yes.
Could you give Dr. Swarup access so that she can share her screen? Yes, please try to do that, Dr. Swarup.
Just a second. I'll just put that on if it is. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
So thank you very much, and I think this is a very important topic that is being discussed today, and Dr. Soumya has summarized the key issues which will be driving this particular session forward. That is, what really are the challenges, whether it's from climate change or post-pandemic, and most importantly, what really are those policy interventions that we are looking at. Now, from the Department of Biotechnology's viewpoint, we do look at investments, we look at new technologies, and I think our full focus is that how do we bring in new technology interventions to address those challenges and gaps, which can then help us to overcome whatever challenges are there before us. In this particular context, it's important to also understand one thing that, just a second, the slides are not changing. I'll just try to, just a second. Just a second, it's got a little frozen, so I need to just get them moving.
Maybe you need to unshare and then share again.
Frozen. Yeah, I'll unshare and share it again, I think. Okay, fine. I think they're moving. Just let me check. Yes.
Yes, we
can
see.
So there they are. So I think climate change, which is the main issue that we are discussing today, and we do know that this has major impact on the nutritional aspects of it, on what our whole food and nutrition aspects are, what really, whether it's the damaged production or whether it's our whole crop fields which get devastated, or it's lower nutrient value of the crops that we are looking at, the nutrient contents, which also not only impacts the crops but also the fields. So there's a whole focus going on to try and see how we look at climate resilient agriculture. But as we move ahead, it's important for us to see how we connect this agriculture, food and nutrition with the actual nutrition status of the population. The Government of India, of course, as we all know, has a National Nutrition Mission, which was launched in which by the Honorable Prime Minister, and we have Niti Aayog, which is driving it. And this is a key enabler to try and see how they can connect nutrition and health challenges together. India has, through its commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, implemented this Poshan Abhiyan, and the Poshan Abhiyan is across all states, and that is to make sure that we do have the nutritional status that we have targeted, and we bring in a large number of policy and other interventions which can help us to achieve that. As Soumya alluded to, it's the data which is coming out recently from many states gives us indicators of where we are doing better and where we need to do better. And I think those indicators are important for us to follow. The Department of Biotechnology, for many of you who would not be very acquainted with it, is responsible not just for bringing out the key policy interventions which guide research and development initiatives which lead towards affordable and innovative product, but it is also important for us to work with all stakeholders. And in this regard, we work with the research institutes, with the academia, and we work with the startups, we work with the industry. But our major focus is how do we actually get these technology interventions translated to deployment at the grassroots level. Unless and until we have adoption of these technologies at the grassroots level, we will not see the impact, and especially with regard to the agriculture and nutrition aspects that we are doing. In addition, there are a large number of studies that we do, and these are some of our key priorities that we address through our nutrition program. And these, while we are looking at what really are the challenges through our various studies that we are doing, what really are those interventions which can help us to overcome these challenges, and more importantly, trying to find new innovative technology interventions which can help us to come up with products and technologies which can help move this ahead. Now, coming to the new technology interventions that we've been working on. So if you look at it from the agriculture viewpoint, it's all the new technologies, whether it's transgenics or marker-assisted selection or gene editing or genomics, application of these tools to be able to see that we bring out crops which do have enhanced and better nutritional qualities depending upon what our targets are.
Dr. Renu, your voice is not coming. Please unmute.
Is that okay now?
Yes.
Hari, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we are able to hear you.
Thank you so much. So if you look at one of the key technologies that has given us a lot of strength to move forward our crop improvement program is the whole area of genomics. And here I would specifically like to highlight that it was in fact in 1998 that India became a partner to one of the largest consortia, and that was the Rice Genomic Consortia. Not only has it given us a wonderful understanding of how we can take forward our rice crop, but it has also helped us to build capacities within the country to take ahead these technologies. And we did the sequencing of the rice genome, and this also then took us, slides fix it up, I guess. So we also looked at the wheat after that, because that again became another important crop for us to be able to see how we could bring in not just the genomic sequencing, but also looking at the functional genomics. And the functional genomics helped us to identify those specific traits where we could look at enhanced nutritional qualities. Today, our scientists have worked on these crops extensively. We have a large number of such improved lines which are now being shared with the farmers. We have them in farmers' fields, and these are in fact the contributions which the scientists along with the plant breeders have been able to take to the farmers. But it's also important for us to see how we bring in the biofortified food technologies, and here the iron fortification was important, and this has become part of our entire midday meal program. This technology that we have done for our trials is important for us to see that we do the complete quantitative analysis. We also look at other aspects of it, and this study is right now happening, but this is a very important technology which has worked, and we are also seeing this being adopted in many other areas. The other major impact that this has made is that when these technologies we've been able to support in different groups, we have also been able to see this, as I said, deployed by our institutes in collaboration with many of our farmers. This is one such example where we have the high anthracene wheat, and this is actually, they've signed the MOU with a large number of farmers. You see this now being grown in Punjab and that whole region. It was also important for us then to see that this becomes a product. Now, the initial resistance that they had on this was that we were not getting the consumer acceptance to this. So this particular product has gone through all the studies, right from the bioavailability studies to actually taking it through the FSSAI approval, etc. But we were not getting a consumer acceptance of this. Nobody would want a purple wheat. So they worked with bakeries, they worked with others, and now it's being accepted very much as a bakery product and others. So these are only ways in which new technologies are being deployed. Similarly, our institute at NIPGR is now looking at bringing out working on chickpea, and we have again, we've got some excellent results. So we have marker assisted technologies which are being used, and these molecular markers have been able to give us improved varieties. These varieties have also now gone through the Indian Council of Agricultural, the All India trials, and through these All India trials, we've been able to now take this forward, and we are hoping in the next season we will be able to release it. So while we are looking at crop improvement on one side to bring in fortified technologies, it was also important to see what are the other technologies which we can take to the farming communities, to the self-help communities, to the women in different district levels, to see if we could set up these self-help groups who can take it ahead. Under the Gates Foundation, we have a Grand Challenges India program, and some of the technologies which have really been demonstrated with very good results are the integrated farming system. In fact, Veggie Light is another very interesting concept which has taken off in Orissa, and we hope we'll be able to now replicate this model where women have been given technologies to be able to grow nutritious vegetables and a mix of vegetables in their backyards. And these vegetables, now we've set up this group, Veggie Light has set up these franchisees where they can go and collect it from them and make it available. So it's not only bringing in the nutrition, but also it's an income generating activity which has come up. So there are a large number of such technologies, and these have had a significant impact. And we see that the population which has used these technologies has further scaled it up, and we've been able to take it ahead. And these are some of the pictures of these technologies actually being deployed by the farming communities and the self-help groups. This is a very interesting program that we launched with the Swaminathan Research Foundation, and Soumya herself has been steering it earlier when she was the DG ICMR, and even now in her current position. So we've set up these Nutri Gardens in 4 different locations around the country. Now, the whole purpose is, while we set up these Nutri Gardens, which bring in not just the concept of having highly nutritious domesticated crop species, but it also helps us to take to the farming communities what really is the importance of these Nutri Gardens, but also more of as an awareness. It also helps us to then use these as test beds, so that what we bring out as interventions here, these technologies, this information can actually flow back into our policy making cell, which I'll come to in the next slide, where we are trying to understand what are the challenges, nutritional challenges, and how can we then bring in these interventions which we've done through our various trials as key questions which can get answered with what we get as the results of these trials. And these Nutri Gardens have actually helped us to be able to establish this in 4 locations. We are hoping that once we get good data and the information from this flows into our policy that we develop for our National Nutrition Mission, we should be able to replicate this in other sites across the country. A very similar example that we've set up is Biotech Kisan Hubs. We've set this up in 115 aspirational districts. These are really taking the science solutions to farmers, but more than that, understanding what the needs of the farmers are, so that then they can come back to the university, come back to the agricultural systems, and they can find solutions for it. We've also done some very interesting trials that we are currently doing, and we have 2 such trials which under the Grand Challenges India have been supported, which are looking at basically, these are interventional trials, and this we are trying to look at women and child health issues. And in fact, as we speak now, the first lot of data has started coming in. We've had the interim results, which are very promising, and we hope that the evidence that comes from these studies, which are now in their first phase of conclusion, will help us to bring in policy decisions which we can then implement through the National Nutrition Mission. Now, towards the end of my presentation, I like to explain to you that when we identify these interventions, when we identify these technologies, how do we sustain them? Are they one-off R&D projects that we do? But if they are interesting technologies, if they're good interventions, they need to be sustained. And for that, for the scaling them up, for sustaining them, you need to engage with the startups and the industry, because then they have to move out of laboratories to become commercially available products. So what do we need to do? We need to look at financing these high-risk innovations. We need to make available risk capital. We need to connect all the stakeholders and give them access to market. We have been doing this through BRAC, which is our wholly owned company of the government. And as Soumya said, this was set up when Dr. Bhan was our former secretary in 2012. And in just about 9 years of this organization, we've been able to support not just the financing part of it, but the mentoring and also enabling access to market. We have today nearly 4,000 biotech startups who've been supported. But more importantly, we've been able to set up a very rich ecosystem of agriculture incubation centers across the country. These agriculture incubation centers have now been able to support young entrepreneurs, young startups who take these technologies to the field level. And once we've been able to get these technologies and we get these products which then can be deployed, it's important for us to see what impact is it having on our ecosystem, and how is it actually impacting the nutritional status. And NIT is the platform that we have set up, and NIT really looks at identifying at state level what these gaps are and taking these technologies. So these are some of the key questions which NIT addresses, right from nutrition to maternal and child health, and all this we are able to bring through these various technology interventions and interventional trials. The last slide, I would like to mention that the government has now, for the National Nutrition Mission, set up a scientific board. This scientific board is housed at BRAC. They look at what the key questions and challenges are, and the Secretariat has been working with experts not only within the country, but even outside globally to be able to find what the solutions are. So the last slide I would like to say is the pandemic, as Soumya very rightly has summarized, has created enough challenges for us. It's important for us to see how the learnings that we've had through various other programs can be deployed to be able to overcome these challenges which the pandemic has brought to us. And for this, it's very important. Our way forward is we need to continue to innovate for public health nutrition program. Unless we do that, our new interventions will not be able to respond to these key challenges. If we are going to support these innovative solutions and technologies, it's important that we connect them to be able to see how they respond to the demand which is coming up in the food sector in terms of our nutrition and food security. It's also important for us to see how we go forward with these agrarian land reforms, which are focused again on adopting innovative and efficient agricultural practices, again, access to new technologies, and then identifying what really are those specific solutions that we need, because each location, each region will need specific solutions so that we can bring in these strategies which will respond to the pandemic. So finally, I would just like to say that to address all this, it's important for us to look at new technologies. From DBT and BRAC, our focus is on new technologies. We have We hope that these will be able to overcome this. We've been able to develop the tools, but now it's important for us, how do we seize this opportunity to take the technology, to be able to deploy it for exactly the needs that we have in this crisis, in this time of challenge that we have. So thank you very much. And I hope through this consultation, we will be able to come up with some very interesting recommendations, which we would then be able to take back into our larger policy that we evolve. Thank you so much, Soumya and Hari, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Renu Swarup, for that very comprehensive overview of what the Department of Biotechnology has been doing in partnership, of course, with many other institutions and agencies under the umbrella of the Poshan Abhiyan that we will hear more about very soon. I want to now call upon Dr. Gagandeep Kang, who, of course, has become very well known during the pandemic for her commentaries on the evolving situation, but is a professor of microbiology at the Wellcome Trust Research Lab in the Division of Gastrointestinal Sciences at the Christian Medical College. Previously, she was director of the Translational Health Sciences and Technology Institute in Faridabad. She's a fellow of the Royal Society, and her work on enteric infections in relationship to vaccines and vaccine effectiveness, but also her work on stunting and malnutrition in Tamil Nadu through long-term cohorts are very well known. I'd like to invite Dr. Kang now to share her insights on some of the drivers of childhood stunting and undernutrition. Over to you, Gagandeep.
Thank you so much, Soumya, and thanks to Dr. Renu Swarup for a truly brilliant presentation. Some of these activities, particularly the ones that BRAC had done with Vegilite and the integrated farming, I remember hearing about it 6-7 years ago and thinking, gosh, there's no dearth of innovation in our country. And it's really lovely to see all of them come to fruition. I'm going to do a bit of a segue and just briefly touch on some of the research that we've been doing in children over the past couple of decades. And the idea really is to say that, you know, the world doesn't stand still, things change, and we need to be thinking about how we change along with that to understand what remains constant and what we need to keep tracking. And just as an example, what I'd like to show you is to start with a figure that is called a matagram. And a matagram because Leonardo Mata followed up a cohort of children in the 60s, actually, with data published in the 1970s, showing the impact of enteric infections on growth. So if you expect a child to grow along a smooth curve, what happens when they get repeated infections is that they fall off the curve and then stay off that curve. And the question that we asked ourselves in the early 2000s was really, is that still happening? Are we still seeing the same consequences of infection on nutrition? So we started to follow up cohorts. We followed children for the first 3 years of life, starting from a cohort recruited in 2001. And essentially what we saw was that girls were more affected than boys, and that normal growth was there in only about 1/3 of all children. If we looked at the amount of stunting that we saw, there is a difference between stunting and wasting, where you see a lot more wasting in central and northern India and a lot of stunting pretty much around the country. In our urban slum population, more than half of our children in the early 2000s were stunted. But if you looked at other ways of classifying them, about 2/3 of all children could be considered malnourished. We saw that, you know, if we looked across the cohorts that we were following up, wasting wasn't as much of a problem for us. as stunting was. And the problem with stunting really was that nobody recognized it as a serious health issue, particularly in slum areas, because the children looked generally quite healthy, unlike wasted children. So although we had started off with wanting to look at infections, the effect of infections, how vaccines would perform, we realized very quickly that we needed to make sure that we were tracking growth and the consequences of impaired growth very well as well. And we then started to create, for all of the children that we recruited into the cohort, Mata grants, much like Leonardo Mata had done almost 3-4 decades ago. And what we could see here, and what was different from what Leonardo Mata had done, was that we brought in other ways of studying infection. One was to look at asymptomatic infection, and the other was to try and look at serology as well, to classify infections that had been missed by routine stool sampling. But overall, as you can see, even in the early 2000s, children were falling off the growth curve and then staying off the growth curve because they were encountering infections. We also noticed something else when we started to follow up cohorts, is that the world was really changing. So we had one cohort that was recruited in 2002, 2003. We had another cohort that was recruited several years later. And we said, let's try and see what has stayed the same and what has changed. And if we looked at what had changed, Tamil Nadu had grown economically. So we had generally a higher socioeconomic status in the second cohort. We had higher education of mothers. And overall, we saw less children having diarrhea and less episodes of diarrhea in the period of time where the second cohort was being followed up. But when we tried to look at what continued to matter, what continued to matter was children who were born low birth weight and the fact that this was a female child in the household. So if we compared the two cohorts, the other factors, the SES mattered in the second cohort. When the rising tide had lifted all boats, the effect of low SES became more significant. And we also found that the education of the head of the household was no longer significant. In fact, what we found was that it was really maternal education, confirming the findings from many others, that really made a difference to how children grew. We also went further to look at enteropathogens by socioeconomic status and showed that children with a lower socioeconomic status carried, when they were asymptomatic, about 4 times the pathogens that children with a higher socioeconomic status did. And if we looked at inflammation in the guts of these children, children with a lower socioeconomic status had inflamed guts, such inflamed guts that their fecal calprotectin levels were higher than those that are normally seen in people who have inflammatory bowel disease. So our children live in a very contaminated environment, and that results in their gut inflammation. It also results in a change in their gut flora, and in studies that we have done with collaborators in Bangladesh and in the US, this paper, which was published in Science last year, showed that across multiple cohorts in Bangladesh and in India, there are 15 microbial taxa that distinguish healthy children from malnourished children. And in a trial that was done in Bangladesh that we are now replicating in India, microbiome-directed complementary feeding was shown to help in a pilot study in children who had moderate acute malnutrition. So overall, what were our key findings? stunting has come down from about 60% to 30% over a decade. When we've looked at cognitive function, we find across the board that in data I haven't shown you, that median IQ in slums is lower than normal. We've also shown across both of the cohorts that we have that persistently stunted children have significantly lower IQs than children who've never been stunted. That gut inflammation and infection are related to the environment that children live in, particularly household environments. And it's also related to the amount of contamination that you see in the food and water stored in the household. And that the microbiome could be a point of intervention for some children. So what are potential policy recommendations? I think to align with what Dr. Renu Swarup had pointed out, is that making science-based decisions is really important, and there remains a lot for science to do. I think it's very important as we work on Swachh Bharat and other efforts that we actually demonstrate, and some of this is being done in the WINGS study to which Dr. Swarup referred, that we demonstrate the impact of sanitation and water safety carefully and see that it is replicated across the board. We should be looking at what maternal interventions can reduce low birth weight, because low birth weight remains a consistent factor in determining the nutritional status of the child. And given that our approaches to feeding have not really changed all that much over several decades, it may be time for us to think about a more science-driven approach to nutrition and to how we feed our children. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kang. I know that you have another meeting that you have to leave to, and Dr. Swarup as well. So I'll take this opportunity perhaps to have one or two questions to both of you. Following your excellent presentations. You mentioned the microbiome as a point of intervention, and I think that's a really very interesting idea which is based on research findings, and you mentioned that there was a trial that had been done in Bangladesh. How easy or difficult would it be to translate that into wider practice? Because is it an individual microbiome based, or can one actually generalize about malnourished children?
So that was the interesting part of the study that we did. We actually did studies across Asia and Africa and found that this combination of 15 key taxa were preserved across most of the cohorts. Closer in the South Asian cohorts, which were Bangladesh, Nepal, and India. And if you made a change, then that change stayed over time in Bangladesh. In the studies that we are doing now, we are trying to see whether in at least 2 locations in India, can we make sure that that change resembles the change that was seen in Bangladesh, and to see whether that is a change that we can do feeding for a defined period of time. Our time periods are 1 month and 6 months, and see if that change can be maintained. What usually happens with the studies that people have done with probiotics before is as soon as you remove the probiotic, you revert to a basal state, and that change cannot be maintained. We hope that with the microbiome, we will be able to effect a more permanent change.
Thank you so much. I think that has a lot of implications also for the Anganwadi and school feeding programs, if indeed some such interventions are shown to have an impact. For Dr. Renu, thank you for really enumerating a number of very innovative programs and interventions that DBT has been supporting and nurturing over a number of years. And I wonder if you have any insights on how some of these successful interventions can be scaled perhaps through the Poshan Abhiyan program. Dr. Renu, are you still connected?
Dr. Renu? Yeah.
Maybe we can come back later to Dr. Renu if she's not able to speak now. It's my great pleasure now to invite Dr. Vinod Paul, who of course everybody knows. He's on the television almost every day. But I've had a very long association with him because he was one of my early teachers at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences when I was doing my residency. So he's a pediatrician by training, spent many years of his career at the All India Institute in the Department of Pediatrics, and then was appointed member of Niti Aayog in 2017, where he was leading health nutrition and HRD, but of course has been very, very actively leading the pandemic response as well. But in addition to that, he's been closely associated with the Ayushman Bharat schemes as well as the Poshan Abhiyan. So I would like to hear from Dr. Paul. All of us would like to hear what the Poshan Abhiyan program has achieved over the last few years, and more importantly, his thoughts on where there are gaps in our knowledge and understanding that will help the policy changes that are needed to address malnutrition in India. Over to you, Dr. Paul, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Soumya. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, yes, you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, all friends around this meeting. It's a privilege to be amongst a galaxy of speakers in this symposium spread over a fascinating range of issues. Congratulations to the foundation. I would like to focus only on child nutrition, given the available time and the focus that I want to bring in, and wish to focus again primarily on the implications for policy on some of the issues which I believe are consistently not on the radar screen, in spite of trying hard in a way. First, 3 points essentially. So first point is, and that I'm taking cue and support also from what Dr. Kang had presented. I think first and foremost, in the context of undernutrition, in the policy discourse and stakeholder outreach discussion, general public space discussion, even serious policy debates, even serious program discussions, and at the state level, what is missing is that undernutrition has at least 3 mothers. It's first and foremost, it's about the real mother in terms of the fetal growth, in terms of having a normal size and length at birth. Non-stunted, non-wasted, good weight babies is critical to start well in life. And it is often not appreciated that 20% of stunting, 25% of stunting, 30% wasting is really attributable to the very fact that the babies are born small. I'm talking here about fetal growth retardation, and of course babies are small also, they're born premature, but essentially referring to IUGR. The second reason for being undernourished, stunted or wasted is infections, which Dr. Kang has very eloquently explained. 25%, if I go by the overall literature where it points to. It's about diarrhea, it's about pneumonia, it used to be measles, in another country it could be HIV-related issues and so on. It is really not appreciated that if you have to address undernutrition, primary health care, prevention of illnesses, and early treatment of illnesses, early care seeking is very critical. And I'll return to this in a minute. But the third one is feeding, real inadequate feeding. So what I hear in general discussion around ocean in policy circles is largely around feeding, and that also very often missing the point. And I'll come to that in a minute. I want to elaborate on this now. If we have to address uterine growth retardation, then we have to be mindful of the fact that there is a part of it which is really changing with time. genetics is the same, but the epigenetics is not really the same across populations. And we carry the burden of epigenetics. We don't know how long it will take for us to overcome the epigenetic phenomenon, but certainly it doesn't happen with the next pregnancy, you know, tomorrow's pregnancy in a woman. It has to be born in life. Then there is a scope of improving the growth of the baby in utero, but it cannot come only during pregnancy. If you're talking about feeding the mother, looking after her in other different ways, treating her own infections, anemia, and so on, it has to perhaps start in the earlier part of her life, at least in adolescence, even more so in pre-pregnancy stage, and then of course pregnancy. And in spite of doing all this, the change in the low birth weight that you expect, and thereby change in the low birth weight related stunting that you would expect, is modest. I'll come to Wing's study, which actually provides some estimates of sort. I may consult a little note here. So it should be remembered that that part of undernutrition is to be understood differently. Often, the emphasis on infection prevention and treatment of diarrhea in particular, again, is I don't hear that often from the people who talk about undernutrition. I hear it from people who are in health very often, and they are pursuing health goals, but we need to bring it all together. We in Poshan tried very hard to bring all the three. By the way, in Poshan, we tried to change the paradigm by bringing to the fore the fact that there are these three mothers of undernourishment in children. So we tried our best to talk about zero diarrheal deaths, and by doing so, we also believe that undernourishment related to diarrheal disease will come up. We promoted hugely zinc, which I believe is the only drug treatment of undernutrition, because that reduces the duration of diarrhea and thereby nutrient loss and appetite gain. All that is brought back by zinc in time. So zinc must be a very important strategy when we are talking about undernutrition, but we don't hear it from the nutrition people. They don't see the connect. But certainly under Poshan and linked to Poshan, India looked at universal rotavirus vaccination program. That was one gain the last couple of years, and the scale-up has happened. Feeding and nutrition issues are only 50 to 55% of the people. And there also, it is two or three things are amiss. One is the timely introduction of semi-solid feeds at 6 months is delayed. It occurs, even just the mere introduction occurs in just about half of babies between 6 to 8 months. This is our CNNS survey. But when it comes to so-called adequate diet between 6 months to 2 years, we falter hugely. Only 10% children have what is known as minimum adequate diet. And that comes from CNNS. It's a 10% is the number that prevails, and none of our states crack anything above 15% or 18%. The point I'm making is that the notion of starting semi-solid feeds timed in a timely manner. This indicator is not moving optimally at all, and even when food is introduced, the optimality of the food is not on the radar screen, because that is a huge effort. And Wing study has tried to address that. It does need effort. So the point that I'm making is that in the policy and the program, the effort that is required to enable the family to feed the baby optimally in the later part of infancy and beyond, which means trying to push about 800 to 1,000 to 1,000 plus kilocalories, is something which is really not embraced by people. Not even, the fact that only 10% children have adequate feed by the UN criteria. All the surveys use that criteria. It is not something which is, data, like there is any problem with the indicator. It is something which is very standard, and other countries do much better on this. But this indicator refuses to move. In fact, the CNNS indicator was 6.4%. The NFHS4 was 10% or 9 point something. The point is, we do not culturally feed infants optimally between 6 months to 10 years. And Dr. Soumya's teacher and my teacher, we also had common teachers apart from being connected in a certain way in learning. Dr. Ghai used to tell us that a child at the age of 1 year has half the food requirement that compared to an adult. And that's a lot of food. Try doing this, in front of your lunch plate and put half of it in the other plate and expect that 1-year-old child to eat it. This is really not in the culture. So I find this, Soumya, to be a very important part which is missing in our discourse. We try to change, but the changing the quantity and frequency and the mix of food to normal between above the age of 6 before it is too late is really a big problem from my point of view. I also have not seen very exciting studies which change this indicator from 10% to 70%. Show me a study in this area where this indicator with even extra effort, even in a research setting, even in an NGO setting, has changed from 10 to 60, level on 80. I've seen some data which pushes it to 20%, 18%. And imagine the effort that it made. And how do you put this in the program? Where is the food? How the food is to be cooked? How do you educate the woman to feed the child 5 times, 6 times with the right amount of quantity, persistently taking a huge period of time? This to me, as far as a pediatrician, is very difficult for me to accept. And I want spotlight on this and colleagues to think about it. So my first point therefore relates on essentially saying that we must appreciate the role played by fetal growth retardation and how it can be and to what extent it can be corrected. We must appreciate that treatment and vaccinations, particularly diarrhea-related effort, will improve the nutritional outcomes. And I'm pleading here that feeding is put in a very simple terms. Send the food home and the child will grow as it can happen. And then we go too far to say that we can have, kitchen gardens and then the child will become tall. There is a connect, but there is no proximate connect. And I think in the program, we are looking at change in indicators over a finite period of time. So that's my first issue with the policy discourse. The second issue is going forward on the low birth weight aspect. The optimality of feeding the low birth weight babies is not in the programs. Because what is the small baby supposed to eat? Breast milk, breastfeeding. How do we enable the mothers of small babies to optimally feed their kids? Expression of milk for a few days, feeding with spoon, kangaroo mother care. Nobody talks about this in the context of nutrition. We talk this in the context of neonatal survival. When I say nobody means in a general discourse. Yes, we are realizing it's important. So the importance of supporting small babies at homes through home-based newborn care model and more, and adding on top of that optimal kangaroo mother care is the way forward. Mothers need to small babies don't latch onto the breast. They're too weak to latch onto the breast. Mother has to express milk, and expression of milk would also require optimum breast milk output in the situation where the baby is not, making effort on the NICU, and then the hormone pathways are not activated. So this kind of a support is not vehemently supported by most people, even in the nutrition sphere. Who talks about this, aggressively? I'm sorry, we talk about lactation counselors, but that's about, a different kind of a support. Low birth weight baby feeding has to be center stage because this baby is already stunted or wasted, 16% of them already out there. And then they'll contribute to a quarter of stunting later on. So that focus, I feel, is something which is amiss. We try to correct it in the Poshan Abhiyan, try to bring focus, but takes a while because the nutrition programs are aligned in a somewhat different ways. This kind of a support, home-based newborn care, kangaroo care is spoken by the health rather than by nutrition. And I'm surprised why nutrition doesn't do it. And where is the worker to support the woman and the family? It's a big gap. We try to align and converge to Asha worker. Yes, there is a program. She's supposed to visit a few times in the course of the first 42 days, more so for low birth weight babies. Are we doing it optimally? Are we owning it up? Are we putting more effort on it? Have we measured how effective this program has been from the point of view of nutrition? Also, last point I want to make on this, and some of you are aware of this, is the home-based newborn care came as a newborn survival program. The nutrition outcomes are not even measured in the original studies in a way. So, some of us came from that side, including myself, on the survival side. But that is the home-based care is the entry, along with KMC, for a critical care of low birth weight babies, and what you do in terms of feeding will also save their lives. My third point really relates to the issue of optimum access to appropriate food by the babies. And here we at times are distracted. I'm now talking about children who have undernourishment. Sometimes we use different terminologies to address this, but managing children with moderate malnutrition or severe malnutrition is an issue. Unfortunately, that is often not driven by science, and the science gets lost in the cacophony of ideologies. I feel very sad on this that we do not come together. Scientific community also does not come together. Scientific community changes positions for the management of such children. How should these children be fed? How should these children be stabilized? We may have made progress, but I also find that there is a need for us to have agreed protocols, how to support these children and how to demonstrate change that can be demonstrated. I know from the early data, the WINGS study, that when you put preconceptional care, pregnancy care, as well as early childhood care, it is possible for us to demonstrate a reduction in stunting in a matter of 2 years or less than 2 years. It is possible. Stunting can change dramatically. I look forward to using the data of the WINGS study for policy change. Still, I think we're still evolving with the right package of services around which we all come together and promote it. On the positive side, I hope that the Swachh movement would lead to less volume and burden of infections for children, on children, in children, and that should have a positive impact. But the worrying aspect is what we know from some of the states for which NFHF5 data is available, vis-a-vis 4, for some reason there are general declines in nutrition indicators, and we finding very difficult to assign the reasons behind it. Maybe a deeper exercise is needed, but that's an important worrying point that I'd like to put on the plate. So in short, my message here is that for policy course correction and policy refinement, we must appreciate 3 aspects of undernutrition: the fetal growth, infection-related adverse nutritional effects, and of course feeding issues, and within feeding issues, the feeding difficulties of complementary feeding and sustain optimum complementary feeding in poor households. And I'm also pitching for a strong voice and support for low birth weight care, which again is not fully supported. I stop here. I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul, for that really very insightful comments based on long years of your experience within the system. And the main challenge really is, as you pointed out, for us to link the health and nutrition communities, as well as for science to really be feeding into the policies as our understanding evolves. But we do need to come together, I think, to address the really quite multifactorial causes for child undernutrition. I think related to this, we would be very happy to hear from Dr. Kaosar Afsana, who is a professor of public health at the BRAC, James Grant School of Public Health in Bangladesh. She's been at BRAC for over 26 years and has worked in research, management, and operations and policy making, has a lot of experience, and is a researcher focused on reproductive, maternal, child, and adolescent health and nutrition, child development, health systems, and fragility of and humanitarian crises. Professor Afsana, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to this important event. And I'm so privileged and honored to be in this August gathering. And I can see some new faces that I know, especially Dr. Vinod Paul. I saw him after a long time. I'm so excited. So my focus today is actually science policy interfacing to improve nutritional status of women and children in South Asia. Although I'm from Bangladesh, I'm focusing in South Asia. So now that we are in 2021, so 2030 is not very far from now. In achieving this ambitious sustainable development goal in this period of 9 years seems to be a far cry from what we have been observing in our South Asian regions. And but we know this in this period, the world is still grappling with the triple burden of malnutrition, undernutrition, overnutrition, and micronutrient deficiency. Despite all those improvements in many countries of South Asia, the picture of malnutrition is gloomy. And even in my own country, we have seen that there's a huge improvement. But according to WHO definition, we are actually living in an emergency situation. So globally, South Asia holds the major portion of undernourished children and women because our number is huge. Nearly 2 out of 5 stunted under 5 children in the world live in South Asia. And the highest prevalence of wasting is also noted in this region. And also nearly half of the women of reproductive age suffer from anemia. And we know that obesity is also increasing in this particular population. I don't want to go because we have heard from many speakers about the status of nutrition. Let me go to what is actually in terms of the climate change and the food system. And especially in South Asia, agri-food system is the backbone. It's not only provides our food and nourishment, but also the primary source of livelihood of millions of people in the region. South Asian farmers feeds over 20% of the global populations with only 5% of the world's agricultural land. Across the world, we are witnessing today not only the disastrous situation of COVID-19 pandemic, but also the effect of climate change. The disturbance of planetary health caused by human-made disasters results in emerging and re-emerging of diseases. And COVID-19 is one recent example of one health that emerged due to interference of ecology affecting plant, animal, and human health. In COVID-19 pandemic, farmers are exposed to unpredictable climate challenges and direct and indirect effects of diseases, uncertainty of agri-food production, processing, marketing, transportation, income, and so on. Despite COVID-19 affecting every country, including the developed ones, South Asian countries are facing more challenging situations due to our large populations, high poverty, poor social protection system, and limited access to protective and preventive measures to contain COVID-19. South Asia is hard hit by the dual challenges of climate change and COVID-19 pandemic. It's therefore critical for us to look at the two global crises happening together and to better understand the interconnected and compounding challenges faced in the food system in South Asia. Nature and process of COVID-19 and climate change impact on agriculture and food system vary. While the impact of COVID-19 is sudden, spreads fast, and causes immediate high risk, the impact of climate change builds slowly over a certain period of time with long-term effect. The impact of climate change on agriculture are manifested through extreme weather events that we have been observing. Global warming is on rise, which is likely to increase the rise of water level and devastation of lands and agriculture, and aggravates the situation of human and animal habitats and health. Climate change effects that we are experiencing today are due to the greenhouse gas emissions. And per capita gas emissions is actually occurring in rich countries and developed countries like USA, UK, and other European countries and Japan. But we are paying the price. Without glacial and slow melting, flash floods, and level of cyclones, frequency of cyclones, untimely rainfall, heat stress, desertification, and so on. These threaten the very foundation of our agri-food system, food security, nutrition security, and human health and well-being. The effects of COVID-19 on agriculture and in South Asia have been substantially greater than in developed countries because of the limited mechanization and high labor intensity in agriculture in this region. About half of the workforce in South Asia is engaged in agriculture. COVID-19 pandemic disrupts the farmers and workforce in the food supply chain in various ways. Both the disease and the safety measures adopted to combat the COVID-19 pandemic continue to make the workforce incapacitated to execute their work. These, in fact, affect food supply from farm to fork and also from workers' income and economic viability of business in the food system. In addition, lockdown or curfew restricts the movement of workers, disrupting harvesting, processing, operations, and similarly, the trade restrictions limit the movement of goods, affecting food supply and consumers' demand from country to country. And price volatility is a challenge in South Asia. COVID-19 exacerbates this situation and disrupts our food security and the livelihoods of those depending on food supply chain. This severely affects smallholder farmers, especially women farmers, making them vulnerable to food insecurity and nutrition insecurity. Ultimately, the whole society, especially the poor, the vulnerable population, women, children, suffer most from nutrition insecurity. Climate change also displaces populations, and climate change refugees or environmental refugees. River erosions and loss of lands and incomes force the populations to migrate from leaving their rural homelands to the cities, and increasing urban population and intensifying urban poverty and malnutrition of all forms. The global capital market and modernization are displacing our indigenous and traditional farming practices and traditional crops and food, and eliminating our traditional food behavior and practices. This deprives our existing good knowledge and practices and culture which are supportive of ecological balance. In this critical juncture, we need to emphasize science policy interfacing. And that means that we should, all the scientists and the policymakers, we should be working together to develop an action-oriented, unified regional policy, because in South Asia, we are all interconnected. So we need to have a regional policy. And this policy needs to be founded on evidence-based decisions with the support of a functional regional network in South Asia. To address nutritional status of women and children, policy and institutional innovations are critical to utilize science and technology in addressing food system and climate change, incorporating traditional and indigenous knowledge of food systems and improving food behavior and practices. The urgency is now. South Asian countries must work together to improve nutrition security, health security, and productivity in the region by protecting the planetary health and creating a better future for our future generation. We cannot leave a fragile and frail world for our children. The government, the private sectors, the civil society, farmers, community, people, women, youth, intergovernmental bodies must work together with interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary scientists coming from nutrition, from agriculture, from health, from education from different sectors for building a better world and better future. It means we must have political commitment, financing, practical innovations, and good governance to save life and save planet. Thank you so much for giving me opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afsana, especially for highlighting the importance of climate change, which through many, many ways impacts the food and livelihood security of large populations. And Bangladesh, I think, has been not only one of the countries that is facing the impacts of climate change and sea level rise, but also has had to face several humanitarian crises, take care of refugees, and yet has made remarkable progress in nutrition as well as maternal and child health indicators. So there is a lot to learn, I think, from experiences of countries like Bangladesh through networks of NGOs, particularly BRAC, which you are associated with. I would like to turn now to Dr. Zitouni Uldada, who is the Deputy Director in the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment at FAO in Rome. Mr. Dada has had a lot of experience of working in the fields of energy, climate change, as well as environment, food, and rural affairs, with 23 years of international work experience. Over to Mr. Zitouni Dada.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you also very much for this opportunity to join this conversation. Very pleased indeed. What I would like to do in the next 5 minutes or so is hopefully to add some new elements and new facts to the presentation that have already been made. So I'll be focusing mainly on the impact of climate change on food security in Asia. And hopefully you will find that important in this context of informing policy making, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. And just to highlight certain aspects with regard to the countries who are most vulnerable to the impact of climate change are often the poorest. And if we look at some statistics on that, 90% of the poor live in South Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific and Sub-Saharan Africa. And if we look at where most people are concentrated, that are mostly affected by climate change, so 70% of the extreme poor are concentrated in just 10 countries that you see in the list there, including countries in Asia. So this is really important in trying to understand the overall impact of climate change and where vulnerability lies. And this trend is going to continue, as we saw yesterday from the a report of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, on the impact of climate change. And the pandemic obviously has made the situation worse. We've seen, as the chair highlighted in the introduction, the report that we published on the state of food security in the world, up to 811 million people around the world were undernourished in 2020. And if we look at how it compared to the year before, there is unfortunately an addition of 118 million more people. So what this means is that all our effort in trying to address SDG 2 to achieve zero hunger by 2030 is undermined. So we're not on track, and this really makes it even worse for us to speed up action and ambition into reaching that goal. And what are the drivers for this? Climate change is just one aspect of that, is one of the important ones, obviously, the climate variability and extremes. But conflict also is another factor that we found that leading to the rise in hunger. Obviously, the latest economic slowdown and also downturn, all the lockdown that we've seen around the world due to the pandemic that affected the economic development, and also access and affordability to healthy diets. And we've seen, unfortunately, the poverty and inequality that is increasing and is also affecting this trend. And if we look at the food, if we look at the food insecurity and how it is distributed around the world, so you can see there are some areas there highlighted in red where severe food insecurity occurs. You can see in Asia, Africa, and other parts of the world, and compared to where moderate or severe food insecurity is also occurring, and that's the orange circle compared to the overall population in that part of the world. So you can see this is really cutting across all areas of the world, some more than others. So it's really, you know, an issue that is happening everywhere around the world, and obviously it has policy implications in terms of putting policies and measures to address this. So if you look at how, again, climate change is affecting different parts of the world in terms of disasters that are happening and that are affecting crops and livestock production, you can see in the case of Asia, it's mainly affected by floods. You can see the blue circle there, 86% in Asia, in addition to drought and storms. And again, as you heard from the IPCC report yesterday, unfortunately, the frequency is going to even increase. And we expect more of these severe weather events. So what this means, again, is in terms of putting policies in place for both the short and long terms, you know, we have to look at, you know, what to prepare better for the future, not just now, but for the medium and long term. It's absolutely critical that we don't put policies just in the short term and trying to fix what we see now, but we have to be proactive and try to understand how the risks are evolving and how we can manage and minimize these risks. And my next point is with regard to, again, looking at Asia in the front line of the impacts of climate change, and why is that, and how this is, again, may evolve in the future. And if we look at the situation of Asia, there are more people who live in coastal areas than anywhere in the world. So you can see, again, the vulnerability and the risk of being affected by climate change. And if we look towards just in the next 9 years, by 2030, we expect around 65% of Asians to be living in cities. So you can link the two. Sea level rise and severe weather events, again, will affect more people in Asia than anywhere else in the world. And if we look again in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, well, Asia contributes almost to half of all greenhouse gas emissions. So there is both the impact and also the contribution. So I just wanted to add this very brief data and also looking into how the situation is evolving in the future, and hopefully this will generate some thoughts, some reflections with regard to the policies that we need to put in place, as I said, not just in the short term, but long term across the world, and not to forget about the most vulnerable countries, the most vulnerable populations and communities, and to give them priority in taking them out of hunger and malnutrition and poverty, particularly in the context of climate change that is getting worse, is getting faster than our policies that we're putting in place. So I'll stop it here, and apologies because I really had to rush. I've got another appointment in 5 minutes. I wish we could have some discussion now. I will join the questions and answers. I could stay for another couple of minutes if that's possible, but thank you very much again for the opportunity, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Zetuni, for those insights. And indeed, this requires much greater discussion on how one actually begins to start addressing the climate change related factors, particularly as you pointed out in Asia with a huge population living on the coastal areas. And that was the reason when Professor Swaminathan started the foundation 30 years ago, he anticipated this problem, and one of the major program areas of the foundation is related to coastal areas and the interventions for people living there, you know, all the way from the mangroves, strengthening mangrove forests that protect coastal systems, coastal areas, as well as looking at the opportunities for integrated aquatic food and fisheries development that impacts the livelihoods of people living in these areas. But thank you so much for that very, very comprehensive presentation. We may have a few minutes at the end, but I do appreciate that you have to leave for another meeting. I'd now like to call upon Mr. Arjun Diwat, who is the Chief of Nutrition in the UNICEF India office, where he's been for the last couple of years. He's been the UNICEF Global Coordinator on Orphans and Vulnerable Children, and before that, the Regional Focal Point on Prevention and Treatment of HIV in Young Children in the UNICEF Regional Office for East Asia and the Pacific.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, and thanks for having us today. I have the difficult task after some brilliant speakers to try to focus some of the aspects, focusing on nutrition, child nutrition. Dr. Paul, thank you very much for the masterclass on child malnutrition. I'll try to build on what you, but also many of the other speakers have mentioned. That means that I will not spend a lot of time on the details on some of the slides that can be shared later. I try to bring some of the points that some of you have also mentioned, try to bring that together. First of all, about half the children are malnourished in one way or the other way. I'm even not even including micronutrient malnutrition. I'll get to that in a moment. This is basically the same kind of information that also Dr. Paul mentioned. If you look at stunting, you really see stunting increasing in this 4, 6, 7, 8, 9 months. Very much because of the diet. The child is moving from breast milk to complementary feeding. But also, most importantly, the child starts moving around and is more exposed to parasites and then other illnesses. On the right-hand side, the wasting, and this actually for me is fascinating coming to India. If you take a wasting slide, wasting by age from many countries, like in Africa, it's got the same kind of curve as what you see on the left. Yeah, starting slow and then from 4 months it goes up. Not in many countries in South Asia, definitely not in India. And you really see that a lot of the wasting is caused because of low birth weight. The problem happens in pregnancy, probably even pre-pregnancy. And I would expand, while we start talking more and more about maternal nutrition, I think we have to look beyond that, beyond the time that the woman gets pregnant. Again, the masterclass was given by Dr. Paul, so I will not go into further details. This slide I find quite relevant, zooming in some of the sub-data for stunting in this case. Would have been very similar for underweight or for wasting. First, urban, rural. What you would expect, yes, also urban malnutrition, yeah, but lower than a rural. Okay, we know that, but don't forget that actually when you look at the numbers, if it's about finding the numbers, the caseloads, we often ignore urban areas. If you would take, for instance, wasting in Maharashtra, about 50% of all children with wasting in Maharashtra are in about 6 urban areas. So if you go for prevalence, you definitely have to go to rural areas. If you want to go also for numbers, we should not forget the urban areas. And I think that's an area where collectively we've not given much attention to. We always tend to go to the rural areas. And on the right-hand side, I find it fascinating. Here we have 50% of the poorest children that are malnourished. But I want to turn it around. It also means that 50% of the poorest children are not malnourished. So poverty does not lead to malnutrition. There are other factors. And you all see that on the right. 80% of the richest kids are not stunted, but 20% are. So even while there's all the money to have good health care, to have good food, because of other factors, and I would put my money most likely because of poor feeding practices, which has got to do with what I would call nutrition literacy, understanding, appreciation of the importance of food and nutrition. Food is more than filling the stomach. Nutrition is more than filling the stomach. And I think that people don't understand it fully. Again, building on, we need to invest much more in nutrition literacy, in particular for the youngest kids. We haven't talked much about anemia, very high, of course, already at the early age, but even we should not forget this poor age group, because kids, when they reach adolescents, particularly girls, they already start poor because we didn't correct anemia at an earlier age. Other micronutrient deficiencies, many kids have got at least one, and these are vitamin A, iron, zinc, several other micronutrients we looked at in the comprehensive nutrition survey. And you see that many kids have got various different and a number of micronutrient deficiencies. Also, children that are not stunted can still have micronutrient deficiencies, so we should not forget those kind of dynamics as well. You even see micronutrient deficiencies in children with overweight or obesity. Let's go to the response. An analysis published in The Lancet earlier this year, which I find fascinating, looking at 11 countries, 4 Indian states, and basically looking at the reduction in stunting. How was that cost? And we as nutritionists, we focus on nutrition and health interventions, but this study also shows that the importance of WASH, education, gender, poverty, it is at least 50% contributing to the stunting reduction that you saw in these 11 countries and 4 Indian states. And zooming on those 4 Indian states, and thanks to the IFPI colleagues for making this slide, you see very much the same. Malnutrition will not be solved by food and nutrition interventions alone. And probably less than 30% of the stunting reduction that we see in these states was because of health and nutrition interventions. We need to deal with early marriage and early pregnancy. We need to deal with poverty. We need to deal with socioeconomic situation. And then came COVID. I recognize 4 pathways, and some of you have already talked about at least 2 of them. The COVID infection, people get infected, and that leads, of course, to malnutrition, children get infected. In some cases, most cases, that's of a short duration. You might pick up again after that. There's, of course, a link between mothers being afraid to breastfeed in the context of COVID. A lot of talk about food systems, food security, and the impact on poverty. I would call it the second pathway. The third pathway, about that one, by the way, I don't think we fully appreciate the compounded impact of several waves. One wave, one shock, many families can deal with. Yeah, but you've got a shock last year and a shock this year, and we're going to have these repeated shocks, then compounded with floods or droughts. Dealing with compounded shocks, the compounding of shocks, is going to be very difficult for families to deal with. I don't think we fully appreciate that impact from COVID. Access to health and nutrition services, a lot of talk about that, and I'll show 1 or 2 slides on that. But to be really honest, for me, I'm most worried about the largest, what I think is going to be the largest impact of COVID. It's governance, leadership, and funding. Portion Abidjan, for me, one of the most amazing programs and commitments of the Indian government that I've seen in any country. Why? Because it came with leadership and financing. And many programs, strategies, and policies on nutrition are lacking financing and are lacking leadership, but not Portion Abidjan. But let's be honest, Portion Pakwara, which was celebrated in March, was abruptly stopped last year, in the 3rd week of March, because of COVID. And since that time, Portion Abidjan hasn't received the same kind of leadership. I'm worried that because of finances, they might not receive the same kind of investment. Well, additional investing was required, and there seemed to be space for states and governments to do additional investments in nutrition. And I'm just worried, is nutrition still going to see that additional investment that was promised or that we anticipated? Or are all these funds needed to deal with the impact of COVID, to prevent COVID, to roll out of vaccination, but also to deal with the other social sector aspects? For me, I'm worried that this 4th pathway might be the most impactful and taking the longest. Yeah, and I think we have to look at scenarios. Best case scenario, we roll out the vaccination, and by the end of 22, next year we're back to normal. But I'm worried about this 3rd scenario, where households are going to continue having this impact of the shocks of poverty. It's going to take them an extended time to replenish their resources that they spend. But also government, it's going to take time for government to have again the kind of leadership that we had in Portion Abidjan, where the Prime Minister frequently talked about nutrition, chief ministers were leading the response, the media was talking about nutrition, things were really happening. Let's look at some of the data, and there's limited data on the impact. There's some data on nutrition services uptake, a significant dip, and I've seen data beyond February this year. By the way, interesting to see how IFA for pregnant women. Interesting how IFA for pregnant women was increasing and the significant dip then in April, and again this year in April as well. The same thing with school-based interventions. Schools were closed, and for me that has been a failure for us as nutrition people. We did not realize 18 months how much COVID was going to affect us and how. We've completely lost some of the platforms functioning, like for instance some of the school-based health and nutrition interventions, like for instance distribution of IFA. And this is a theoretical model, where in the past, if you look at NFHS 3 and NFHS 4, we had a reduction of about 1% stunting per year, which is the blue line. Then the red line came because of Porsche and Abidjan. We were going to a target of 2% reduction per year of underweight and of stunting. And I think it was possible. If you asked me 2 years ago, I thought, yes, it's possible. But now the gray line. Yeah, and these four pathways, these worst case scenarios, I'm worried that malnutrition rates are going up. And it will take a long time to get indeed to that 1% reduction and even the 2% reduction that we were aiming for, as we had hoped. So what is needed? 6 areas. We need to get this leadership that we had in Porsche and Abidjan. We need to get that leadership back. And we know from the Lancet studies, we know from the 4 state studies in India, reduction of stunting, direct relation with leadership, with the leaders pushing this, holding people accountable and collectively working. Universal coverage of the services, and that has not been the case anymore. Services have been affected. Adequate financing, and we need to relook at that. And also make decisions, and even the previous one, if we can't do all the same interventions anymore, because frontline workers are also involved with case tracing or with vaccination, what are we going to prioritize? We might have to reprioritize. If there's less attention, but also less resources, how are we going to reprioritize the high impact interventions? We might not be able to do everything. The multi-sectoral response, data. At the moment, we don't have data even on malnutrition levels. And as UNICEF and partners, we reach out to state level governments, we reach out to several NGOs, even trying to get access to routine growth monitoring data, because if you have enough growth monitoring data, you could use that as a surveillance mechanism. Is indeed COVID resulting in a reducing nutritional status? But getting the data is very difficult, and measuring the impact of COVID on nutrition situation and services is very challenging. And you already mentioned the multi-sectoral and holistic systems response. But I think we need to re-strategize the nutrition response. It's not about building on what we had 2 years ago. No, we might have to accept that we might not have the same level of leadership, the same level of prioritization, and the same level of financing. So what do? Can we have scenarios, response scenarios for the best case scenarios? How do we respond in the best case scenario? But also this worst case scenario. How would the nutrition response have to look like? We know what works. We know how to reduce malnutrition. It's a comprehensive response, not just nutrition intervention. It's a multi-sectoral response. We know we need leadership. We know we need to address COVID. We know how it needs to be done. And now again, we need to go back to do we have the leadership at all levels, politically, but also academia, NGOs, civil society, and of course, communities, parents, to actually stop malnutrition in India. I thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Arjun, for really highlighting not only the impact of the COVID pandemic on the nutrition of mothers and young children, but also the focus that's been taken away from nutrition, but also, I must say, from other flagship programs like the tuberculosis elimination program that was also a major focus of the government of India, and other essential health services. So I think we have to recognize the impact that the pandemic is having and will continue to have on other health indicators and parameters. And nutrition is really, really key. And I hope that the focus can be brought back, with Dr. Paul's leadership to Poshan Abhiyan, because malnutrition obviously contributes also to reduced immunity and increased susceptibility to infectious diseases, as well as to non-communicable diseases, both of which clearly increase the risk if one gets COVID as well. We have come to the end of the time allotted for the panel discussion, which has been extremely enriching and enlightening. I'd just like to ask the panelists if they have any last words, having heard all of the interventions. If there are any key, if I could ask each of the panelists to just take perhaps 1 minute to say what policy intervention would you give high priority to, understanding, of course, and accepting that there are multiple interventions and that everything is multifactorial. But from your own experience, at this point in time, what would be the one key area where either we need more research or a policy intervention to have an impact? Maybe I'll start with Dr. Afsana.
Thank you very much. I'll just say a few words. I believe, as I say, that South Asia is, we are all interconnected, so we cannot separate ourselves. So we need to think about not only for our own country, we need to think more broader. So I would always bring the regional network to be connected. We have done many regional network, and SARC is still continuing, but it's not functioning the way it should have been. And I wish that as many intergovernmental agencies are there, we need to be very serious about this issue, because if we don't support each other, we will not be able to flourish ourselves. And that's the key message from me, because one of the issues that we are still depending on our food system for agriculture. We're still depending on climate change is affecting severely. And we are not the people who are making all those green gas emissions. So we have so many things we need to work together. And I feel that science and policy interfacing, and that there should be one unified science policy interfacing. And I would reiterate again and again that we need to all work together, not only the nutritionists, we need to bring, as Dr. Vinod Paul said, the health, nutrition, food system, we need to all work together. Otherwise, we are ignoring that what we have. We have learned a lot, and we have more issues to learn. And it's not that we have don't have the lessons. And India is one of the country, we have so much experience from our indigenous knowledge, and we are completely ignoring our indigenous knowledge. And science is not ignoring the indigenous knowledge. The science is to incorporate indigenous knowledge with the modern technology, so we can do better for our future generations.
Thank you, Dr. Afsana. I think your point about having regional networks, bringing people together and having these dialogues and continuing the cross-learning across the countries in this region is extremely important. I'll turn to Mr. Devat now for maybe just the one thing that you would like to highlight.
Yeah. Well, thank you. 2 years ago, I went on a road trip with my family to Madhya Pradesh. We drove from Delhi and around to Madhya Pradesh. We drove 2,600 kilometers. Many art firsts for soft drinks, many art firsts for noodles on the way. And somewhere in the village, there was the only message about breastfeeding, was a breastfeeding corner somewhere in the village. There was the only thing that I saw about nutrition. And that's what I would like to if there's one thing, at the end, ultimately government is not going to stop malnutrition. Communities, families, parents, individuals are going to stop malnutrition because they are the ones who are eating. Even if you give them food, as Dr. Paul mentioned, if they don't know how to use the food, it is still not going to stop malnutrition. And I think that the intensity, the coverage, the continuity of promotion of healthy eating about nutrition literacy is just too limited. We've seen the kind of intensity of COVID prevention messages. I think it's been amazing. And I must admit, walking around in Delhi on my Sunday morning walks, I was jealous because all those bus corners and all those billboards, I wish there was nutrition messages as well. So we know it can be done. And that the COVID has shown you can have this mass mobilization and awareness raising. It's been amazing. Nobody had heard about COVID, of course. can we do the same for nutrition? At the end, people eat, individuals, they eat, and we have to help them, rich or poor, undernutrition, overnutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, etc. It's all about healthy eating. Let's promote healthy eating, enabling people to healthy eat. And that means the message needs to be going out there. That is really missing. I want to have 52 breastfeeding weeks per year, not just the one that we had last week. Next month, we have September Nutrition Month. I want to have 12 nutrition months per year. Let's focus on a different theme every month. And maybe that will make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's really, really important. I think we have to keep a focus on nutrition and maybe learning from how we've used all the different channels for communication during COVID pandemic, especially social media channels. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to increase nutrition literacy and the solutions coming from households, families, communities. I think that's very important. Turn to Dr. Paul now for last words.
Thank you, Soumya. I would like to promote optimum feeding of small babies. Absolutely important. These are the babies who remain suboptimal in nutrition. They also have issues about survival, and therefore a very clear focus on small babies, at least after birth, which is, we understand how to do it much better with express express breastfeeding, kangaroo mother care, assisted feeding, and huge guidance and to the families. And it is conspicuously weak in programs. And second link to this is really optimality of complementary feeding, not just introduction, but optimum food being eaten by the baby. And again, as Aryan said, it's about behavior. Both are behavior issues, but the behaviors need to change in the positive direction with assistance and help and support and guidance, and using also support may be an interesting idea. Messaging that can be imparted through remote means. When you look at how far we are from optimum complementary feeding, I shudder. It's a really, really very, very. We're still not talking about quality of what the babies eat, but even the amount that the babies eat, diversity, so weak. So I think low birth weight feeding and optimum complementary feeding is very, very critical from India's point of view. And underlying this is the behavior change, and underlying driver of this would be people's movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think that is really the key, the message that we need to improve the quantity and the quality of food, and the key time for intervention is during the period when the fetus is still in the mother's womb, and then the first 2 years of life. So the first 1,000 days are critical for both physical and cognitive development. We've heard also that physical undernutrition leads to reductions in IQ, and that means a future capital of our country, of our population. I think what we really need to implement now is this enabling. How does the system actually enable a mother, a family, to feed an adequate and a balanced diet, both to herself and to the children? And I think we need to continue to learn from the successful interventions, and as well as from the huge amount of research that's going on in South Asia as to how to do this. One of the proposals, of course, for some time has been to expand the basket of foods that's available through the public distribution system, particularly for those who are from the socioeconomically weaker sections who really depend on the PDS, but currently are offered mainly cereals, which has taken care of the food insecurity aspect, but the nutrition insecurity aspect is still a big void, a big gap. And we need to fill that with millets, with pulses, with fruits, with vegetables, as well as with animal protein. And we have to think about policy interventions, again, which could help to bring those and make them affordable to people so that they can actually improve the quality of the diet, which, as we heard, both across adults and children currently is absolutely suboptimal. So with that, I thank also the foundation for inviting me to chair this session, and I will hand it back to Dr. Hariharan for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Soumya. Indeed, every one of us will agree that this is a very enriching session. And on behalf of the organizing committee as well as foundation, I take this opportunity to thank you as well as the learned, very, very accomplished speakers. We were able to take the notes, and later in the afternoon we will have the concluding session. So the key messages will be taken and will be presented, and we will formulate a recommendation, and that will go to the local governments as well as the appropriate agencies to take it up, and how best we can convert them into meaningful policies and so on. Thank you very much for being with us, to you as well as to all the speakers. Thank you very much. We can break now.